This is Rue Ziegler. I'm interviewing Volker Eisele. This is tape number 2, and this is November 18th, 2008. So, Volker, we were talking about the influence of these various 1960s movements, various strains, which must have been extremely strong at Berkeley at that time.
Well, I think it's fair to say Berkeley was, for a while in the 60s, the intellectual center of the Western world, or of the whole world. It was, first of all, the political struggle for civil rights, which had grown out of the struggle against HUAC and things like that. And then came the free speech struggle and the struggle against the war in Vietnam. And I learned a lot for myself and my own political views. And then came the hippie movement, which I didn't care for very much personally, not for moral reasons or anything like that. It just didn't appeal to me. And but then the environmental movement really became very, very important to me. And that coincided with my move to the country, so to speak, having this country house, being exposed to open space, and then eventually reading stuff, and I began to understand things a lot better. And I had some friends then in Berkeley who knew about not using phosphates. I mean, as a little item, I'd never thought about things like this, right? And we knew, of course, about Rachel Carson. We knew about the demise of the pelicans. We knew all those things. We learned a lot in Berkeley. And then it was also the time when food habits changed. It wasn't in the beginning so much that it became super duper luxury food, but natural food, as it was called. You would use fresh ingredients. We all know about chez panisse, which I've never liked all that much, but it became incredibly important as a propaganda instrument for this kind of movement of using fresh ingredients. Now, my wife and her mother, my mother-in-law, were fabulous gardeners. And my wife always had a fabulous vegetable garden. And we had fruits, and we would can things. We would do all these things. And then I would write to my mother and my aunts, and we would get recipes. And so it all became part of this movement. And that had a tremendous influence on our decision-making, wanting to live in the country, wanting to live a natural life, you might say, and wanting to be as close to nature as possible.
Yes, there were these strong feelings about living off the land.
And living off the land, yes.
Local food production, which is fortunately coming back now.
Yes.
Into vogue. Who was the first person you met in the Napa Valley who shared your sentiments about open space? And I guess your sentiments were growing at this point.
My wife, very clearly. She and I, that was part of it. We are very similar. We have very similar backgrounds and so on. But we have very similar or almost identical views on the value of open space, on the value of nature, the love of animals, and the love of everything natural. So that was very, very important. Very, very important. And when I met, for example, Dick Stelzner, it was a little bit different. He was well versed here, but he was hunting and things like this. This was sort of a slightly different side. The only thing I thought that was good about it is you would still live off the land. You would go out and shoot a deer and cut up a deer and so on and so forth. But Liesel was really herself very, very important in this respect.
And who did you meet outside of Liesel in the Napa Valley who shared both your viewpoints, yours and Liesel's? What about, well, Dorothy Erskine?
I didn't meet her until 1974.
All right. So we're.
Now, what happened was something else. It started with a conflict, because we had just made the move from Berkeley to our country home, which we had remodeled so we could fit into it.
And this was in?
That was in 71.
71 that you finally left Berkeley.
71, 72, we did that. And then we found out that right in the neighborhood, some people wanted to establish a motorcycle park. And that upset me greatly. I mean, I didn't go to the country to be confronted with that. It just made me furious.
And that was the other property that we're talking about now, the Sage Canyon Road.
That
property.
was, yeah, when we were, yeah. It's this motorcycle park you envision, this is lying in between here where we are sitting and that place in Sage Canyon. Sort of 640 acres of motorcycle park. And, you know, terrible. However, now Berkeley came into play because I had learned something about organizing. And so I organized the neighborhood within a 5 to 8 mile radius of our house to get them all to the hearings. And I would visit with people and so on. And I learned to speak before the planning commission. I'd never done this in my life. And later on the board of supervisors. And we did win this fight after a several month struggle. Now the board of supervisors meets on Tuesdays. On this Tuesday in August, when they voted down the motorcycle park, on the following Saturday, it was in operation. And that is what got me going. Nothing got me going more than that, because I found this was outrageous. It violated all my ideas about America. Fairness, justice, process. I mean, it's insane, right? The supervisors vote 4-1 to turn something down, and then it starts 4 days later. And it's an operation. So then the struggle begins. So we would write to the county, and we would get a letter back. We don't know anything about this. And the sheriffs would show up Sunday mornings at 8 and start harassing us. Why we oppose such a wonderful thing for the children. And so on and so forth. And they would ask for our dog license.
As a way to try to catch you in
violation.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. It was strictly harassment. So we wrote to county council. I still have the letters. They are very amusing. And he would write us official letters on official stationery that they had absolutely no evidence that the motorcycle park was in operation. And finally, Liesel and I stopped at a tree where there was an 8x4 sign nailed to the tree about the motorcycle park when it was open and so on. Very visible. And we had this old Buick and was fairly high, and she jumped on it, and then she climbed into the tree and got that thing, and then we put it in the car. And then we drove down, and I walked into county council's office and put it on his desk and said, "Here's your evidence." So little things like this. And then I talked to John Tudor, because that was the only person I had known or had met. And he had been elected supervisor in 1972. And I remember during the gas crisis, there was a cheap gas station in Napa where we would get gas. And I met him at night at the gas station. I said, you know, we are not making any progress with this stupid motorcycle park. And then he explained to me how this works at the Board of Supervisors. If there is something in somebody's district, you cannot touch that unless the supervisor of that district says, okay. So the supervisor of our district protected his buddy who owned the land for the motorcycle park.
And who was that supervisor?
That was then Marshall Sears. He's dead now. So John Tudor said, find a candidate. And I've done things ever since like that. No, I don't. I'm not going to go back. That's okay.
Well, I wonder...
Or maybe I should. This could be this.
Volker, I wonder if we could back up a little bit now and focus on the creation of the Ag Preserve in April of 1968 when the ordinance passed. When was the first time you heard about the hearings to try to pass this ordinance?
I heard about this first in 1967 through Dick Stelzner. And we would see each other quite frequently, he and his wife and Liesel and I, and he would tell us about hearings. And he told us about that he was going to the hearings with Nathan Fay and Warren Wieniawski, whom Liesel knew from something else. And so we had a little bit of an inkling, and we would occasionally read the local newspaper. So we had sort of an idea, and we knew what was planned, and we were very, very much in favor. And we asked Dick, what can we do? And he said, write a letter. So Liesel and I wrote a letter to the Board of Supervisors or Planning Commission. I forget, and I'm sure somebody threw it away. You know, we were nothing, you know, obviously. So nobody was interested in our letter. But we did it anyway because we felt that was something very important.
And now Nathan Fay, how was he involved at this time?
I didn't know because I knew only from Dick Stelzner about Nathan Fay, who was his neighbor in Stag's Leap, and he was, quote unquote, a prominent grower in Stag's Leap. I heard so many things about him. He must have been God. I didn't know. As I say, I'd never met him. So that's how I knew about the Ag Preserve.
And Dick Stelzner, what was his wife's name?
Maria. Well, they are long divorced.
Oh, but they were very involved in the hearing.
He was. She wasn't. He was.
And also Nathan Fay was involved.
Yes, Nathan Fay, evidently. But I knew this only from Dick. And so that was our, you might say, our idea about the Ag Preserve. And to me, I can tell you honestly, what I found, one of the most shocking things about America I found is that you can cut up land into little pieces and sell them. I'd never heard of such a thing. Only in America. You can't do that in Europe. You just can't. At least not legally. And I never forget when later on, at an occasion, Dick Stelzner came by our weekend house and said, you know, you guys better subdivide your land because the county is increasing the minimum lot size here to 10 acres in the hills.
Because it had been 1 acre.
Yeah.
Zoning.
And I mean, I was absolutely flabbergasted, and Liesel, who was the legal owner, I didn't want to say anything. And after he had left, I said, why would we do something like this? And she said, we are not going to do this. And I said, absolutely not. And of course, so we didn't do this, right? And but it reflects also the uncertainty about the land. The egg preserve was only the valley floor. And the only idea that was important there was their vineyards. Nobody cared about the hillsides. And suddenly, from Dick Stelzner's comments, you had to assume that he didn't care about the hillsides either. But part of the problem was not so much that people thought the hillsides would be destroyed. Most human beings have trouble anticipating that when you look at an area like this, that this could ever be destroyed. Why would anybody do this, right? And then before you know it, you have a city there. And when you have the modern population movements, modern technology and all of this, it goes very fast. And so I'm sure Dick Stelzner said this in all innocence, because there's all this wide open space. So if the Eiseles do this little bit here, it's no big deal, right? Doesn't hurt anybody. And also people could not understand. 1970, for example, the county had, I believe, a total population of 80,000. In those days, the city of Berkeley had 125,000. And here was a whole county with 80,000. I mean, to me, this was a dream. It was fabulous. You have so much open space and so few people. But that this could change rapidly, to this day, human beings have trouble believing it. That can happen more or less overnight, if you allow it.
People have a hard time seeing the cumulative effects of these smaller increments of change. What was your next involvement with the Egg Preserve? You wrote a letter to the Board of Supervisors. I don't know if you still have that letter.
I wouldn't even know, tell you the truth.
What was your next involvement after writing the letter? Well, it passed, of course, in April. Do you remember when it passed?
Yeah, I did remember then. By that time, I would go to our neighbors and get the old newspapers and read the Napa Register. And we had always subscribed to the St. Helena Star. So we had sort of an idea. And Dick Stelzner also knew Jack and Jamie Davies. And so Liesel had met the Davises at some party also. You know, this new emerging wine group, there were very few people in reality. Very, very few people. It's a handful of people.
Wasn't this the group that James Conaway has called the New Exciting Wave? Something like that in his books.
No.
When he writes about this time.
Well, maybe. I must confess, I don't recall that particular concept. But
that would have been you, the Mays.
No, wasn't us. No, we weren't part of this.
Because you weren't part of this.
No, I mean, I don't want to give you a false impression. We came later, prominently. And when we came, the Mays, the Davises, the Gambles, they were all here. And they were different. And there was another thing. We weren't considered well-to-do. Although this probably played less of a role. And our main contact was really Dick Stelzner, who knew a lot of people. And we met a lot of people through him.
Now, Dick Stelzner was in favor of the Egg Preserve.
Yeah, he was. But as I say, it was strictly a business decision, you might say, for protecting agricultural land and for vineyards. And everybody saw this is going to be damn good business here with the vineyards. And the land was unbelievably cheap. Unbelievably cheap. You could buy good vineyard, top vineyard, when we first came here, for $1,000 to $1,500 an acre, and then it went to $2,000 an acre. Think about that. I mean, it's unimaginable. And what happened, this is again something that hasn't been sufficiently analyzed. It was a unique historic opportunity that vineyards were affordable. In Europe, especially in the good areas, they have the status of crown jewels. You know, you can afford to own them. Obviously, you don't have to make money off them, right? And we are approaching that here too. I mean, it's a sign that you can afford to own a vineyard, that you're really wealthy. You can't just buy a vineyard and try to make a living. That's over.
In where you came from, in the wine growing areas of Germany, did the vineyards remain in the same families for generations?
Yeah, I knew very little about those areas, but I had heard that there were places that had been for hundreds of years in the same family. And that is absolutely true. There are lots of family businesses. It's, I think when you really look at it critically, the quality demands and the intensity of that agriculture, I think, makes it a unique, you might say, family type thing. It is very difficult for large business over a sustained period of time to really have super duper quality. Very difficult.
Was part of the appeal of this area for you that this could be a family enterprise, becoming a grape grower?
After I came here, yeah, oh, sure. But that wasn't the key thing. Because we always felt with our children, if they want to be in it, fine, and if not, fine. We lived the way we wanted to live. We liked wine. We liked the country. It was ideal for us. And ultimately, the key for us was that the land couldn't be destroyed. And that's why we went into the land trust eventually. So whether the children continue this or not didn't make that much difference.
You were trying to found a dynasty.
No.
Who were some of the first people that you met who were opposed to the ag preserve, and how did you feel about the opposition?
It took a long time to meet people who were opposed to the ag preserve, because very quickly the ag preserve became sort of a motherhood and apple pie thing. Very quickly. Where people drew the line was the hillsides. And the very sharp divisions between land protection and land preservation, the battle lines weren't drawn that clearly as they were drawn a little bit later. And so all the people we got into contact with supported the ag preserve because they were all relative newcomers. We didn't know anybody who was a so-called old-timer. And the first time I saw old-timers was when Liesel and I went to the hearings on the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors, because the commissioners and the supervisors were partially old-timers.
And these were hearings?
Yeah, that was 4 years after the Ag Preserve was established.
These were hearings now on what?
On this motorcycle park.
I see. Yes.
But you see, even a person like John Tudor, he was something new in Napa County. John Tudor had started an organization that interested me in 1971 called Napans Opposed to Wasteland, or NOW. And that was really an open space organization. And he was strongly influenced by Dorothy Erskine and her ideas of open space and the people she was in touch with. And so the idea of open space per se, not just agriculture, that I personally found a lot more appealing and interesting at the time.
Because it was more embracing.
It was more embracing, but at the time I was not in agriculture myself. And, I was new to this game, you might say. It took a while to really sink in and understand very clearly what was actually needed and how things were going to be and so on. But the motorcycle park, I told you the story in detail because it got me into politics. And I got to know John Tudor, and we started looking for a candidate. And in December of 1973, we started a supervisorial campaign in our living room for somebody new here. He was not an old-timer. He was a professor from Pacific Union College in physics, Dr. Dowell Martz.
Could you spell the name?
M-A-R-T-Z.
And the first name?
Dowell. D-O-W-E-L-L. And he won the election, supervisorial election in 1974. And we kicked out this old-timer from St. Helena. And that was a revolutionary step. And all of a sudden, we had some other guy from Napa, Sam Chapman. And we had 4 supervisors on our side.
And they were now John Tudor.
John Tudor, Jenny Sims, Sam Chapman, and Dowell Martz. And
who was the 5th at that point?
A fellow named Gene Norris, who was a furniture dealer from Napa. I can still show you his characteristic body movements. He was awful. But that's neither here nor there. He's long forgotten. But it deserves to be remembered. And this is something that had a tremendous impression on me. John Tudor was elected in June of '72 to the Board of Supervisors with Jenny Sims. He took his seat on January 2nd, 1973. And in February, he engineered an emergency ordinance that put a 40-acre minimum on the hillsides. That was the revolution. And you should have seen the, you might say, the outcry. We gave you the valley floor, and now you are taking the hills from us. That's when the battle lines became really drawn. And it took decades to resolve that battle. Decades.
Yes, because that battle wasn't resolved until 1980, was it?
No, much later. Much later. Even later. But we'll go to that.
94.
94, yes, and it was really now, November 4th, this November, we were able to put 160-acre minimum protected under Measure P. This is new. In 1990, I wanted to do that for Measure J. I couldn't do it. It was not doable. So this is how long it has taken to really anchor the protection of the hillsides. They're not fully protected. There's still a lot missing, but that's a subject for another discussion. But John Tudor's move in '73 was for me a signal that somebody could really do something. One could really go there. And I found this most fascinating. And I was absolutely in awe of that. That was really great. And then when we won the election in '74, for a short time, I thought, now everything is okay. The world is okay. And I remember going to Mr. Hickey. I called him those days Mr. Hickey.
This is James.
That's Jim Hickey, yeah.
Hickey.
Now we are very good friends. And I said, Mr. Hickey, could you tell me, could we ever get 160-acre minimum? And he looked at me and said, you nitwit, what are you talking about? But the campaign for Dr. Martz had one other byproduct. I met two people who became very important to me. And I was not in agriculture yet. Nathan Fay and his wife Nellie, who did a party for Dal Martz, and I arranged that with them. And I met Dorothy Erskine. John Tudor said to me, you've got to meet Dorothy Erskine, she will help you with the election. So I met Dorothy Erskine because I organized a party for Martz at her house in Calistoga.
At Dorothy Erskine's house.
Yes. And we got to talking, and we talked a lot, and I was there several times. And then I was invited by her to a special meeting of the group she had that was called People for Open Space.